All right. Oh,
He did.
we're about to do
That part he
broadcast,
won't
everybody.
see very well.
Here we go. Okay, it's called Bring It In. Happens every day, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Different at the time zone that Chad Ford is in. What time is it now where you are, Chad?
It is 4:59 a.m.
What a great time to start talking about your book. David Thorpe is here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Chad, I'm going to talk about you for just a second here. You're noted as a NBA draft expert, which you have been doing for how long?
Forever. Let's
Basically forever.
see. Sportstalk.com, NBAtalk.com, first draft, 1996.
1996. You're a professor. That's a full-time job.
Since 2005.
It's 2005. You are a, I'm going to quote Jim Farrell?
Yeah, Jim Farrell.
Jim Farrell says that you are one of the best conflict resolution professionals on the planet. He is a managing partner at the Arbinger Institute. So you've actually taken more than 50 trips overseas to negotiate world peace. That's a bit of a shorthand version. That sounds like a full-time job. And you have several kids.
8.
Is that really the number?
That's the number.
That's a lot of kids, man. And on top of that, you decided, I know, I'm not busy enough. I'll do one of the most time-consuming things humans can do, which is launch a couple of podcasts and write a book. Is that right?
Yeah, though in fairness, I was in at least ESPN limbo writing that book. So
God bless that ESPN limbo. Yeah, that's good.
I had a little extra time on my hands when I was in
Extra
ESPN
time.
quarantine.
Yeah, you're in ESPN quarantine. So I spent some time with your book. It's called Dangerous Love. It's about your other career. It's about your negotiating peace and being a professor career. And I spent some time reading it on my laptop in the dark alone this morning, and I was so moved I literally cried. The book starts with basically picturing your enemies and trying to see them as real people, and it's amazing. It's super powerful. It's delightful to read, and I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of it by telling us the story of this young woman named Miriam.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. The book opens with a story that happened actually a number of years ago when I was working with a number of nonprofits, and they were sponsored to come in and do a number of different workshops, one of which I was leading. And there was this young woman, Miriam, who had started a nonprofit and was struggling with that nonprofit. She was in the Middle East. And at one point, she just interrupts me as we're going through everything, because we were talking about this concept of seeing people as people instead of seeing people as objects, and how that transforms our view of conflict. And she just raises her hand. She's clearly really frustrated. And she says to me, but what if the person that's in my way is evil? Essentially. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you tell me more about that? It's actually not an uncommon reaction, and partly why I started my book that way, because I think the first thing that our minds go to when we think about conflict that's difficult or hard for us to solve is the reason it's hard to solve is because the other person is impossible to work with, live with, talk to, / all the way when we're really deeply in conflict to evil. And so I just asked her to tell me more. And she began to talk about a nonprofit that she had started that was getting women, Muslim women, involved in sports. The problem was in the community that she lived in, there was only one gym in the entire community. And it was owned by a man who refused to let women play in the gym. I mean, it's interesting, we could go into a lot of, that's interesting nonprofit to start, like, what were you thinking to a certain extent? But she was thinking, look, we're going to go into this gym, we're going to practice in this gym, and we're going to be able to use it. Except the man refused to let them use it. She tried a number of different tactics, including at one time protesting and picketing the gym to get him to open up. And he just refused. And the more she pushed, the stronger he pushed back. And here she was at this workshop trying to figure out, really, how do I get into this gym? And what she didn't want to hear was everything that I was saying, which is about, it's about how you see other people and sort of thinking about seeing their humanity. She wanted to hear that. And so I started asking her more questions about him on a personal level. And the answer was she didn't really know, which isn't surprising at all to me. A lot of times the people that are our enemies are actually the people that we least understand And then instead of really getting to know them and their motivation, fill that in with what I call our assumptive world. We'll assume a bunch of intentions and things about that person to make ourselves feel better. And so Miriam and I began having a conversation, which ended with she was going to go back and try to get to know this person better. And this was her idea, by the way. She thought that maybe one thing that she could do, she noticed that in the gym, it was the only gym in town. Many of the people in the community didn't have money. And so people were constantly asking him to use the gym for free, which then was a burden on him because this was his only source of income in the community, and that maybe she could help. And so she and some of her friends decided that they were going to volunteer to go in and clean the gym at night because this man essentially ran the gym with his wife, and it was a very, very long day. And he accepted. So he wouldn't let women play in the gym, but he would let them clean the gym, which probably doesn't surprise, some of you. And she emailed me back very excited when she got back. Hey, he's going to let us clean the gym. After a couple of days, she emails me again. Can I ask him now? Can I ask him to use the gym? And I'm like, okay, now let's hold on for a second here. Let's sort of think about this. And why are you asking him now for the gym? What do you really know about him? And the answer was she didn't really know much. And if she'd asked for the gym at that time, I think it's pretty clear that he would sort of understand what was going on and wouldn't. And that the point of dangerous love is that you actually have to be able to see this person's needs so clearly that their needs, wants, and desires matter as much as your own. And until you're there, you don't ask for the gym. And so this goes on for about a month before I get another excited email which says he's invited us over for dinner. And of course, she decides at that point, hey, let's ask him at dinner to use the gym. And I'm like, just hold on, just go to dinner. Just go to dinner, meet the family, just enjoy yourself. And so she does. And it's there that she talks to his wife, and she sees the picture of a daughter that she doesn't know in the home. And then for privacy's sake, I can't get into all of it, but just the father was estranged from the daughter. And part of it had to do with the gym, that she was actually a very talented athlete. He built the gym for her so that she could practice and play. And she became so good that she was ultimately recruited to go to the United States to be an athlete there. And there she had given up her traditional Muslim faith in ways that were deeply painful to the father, to the point that he had disowned her and they were estranged from the family. And he vowed, I'm never going to let another woman play in this gym. And it's at that point that Miriam emails me back, and she says, this is the story. She laid it out. And then she says, it's one of my favorite lines ever in an email: don't worry, I'm not going to ask to use the gym. I just want to help. And through social media, she finds his daughter. She reaches out to him. She helps with the mother and several other people invite a reconciliation, which actually ultimately happens. And ultimately, Mahmoud, the father, gets reconciled with his daughter. And then, without her asking, he offers to let her use the gym. And so this is a little diagram that's up on the screen right now. And it's one that we use throughout the book. And it's this idea that, imagine that when you're in conflict with somebody, that you're standing back to back with the person, like you're elbowing the person, and you can feel the person, but you can't actually see the person. And I think this is sort of a great metaphor for conflict that we're in. We deeply feel them when we're in conflict with them, but we just can't see them. And I'm not talking about physically seeing them. I'm about seeing them deeply enough that their needs, wants, and desires matter as much as my own. And so then what has to happen, and this is the hardest part about dangerous love, is that the natural reaction when I'm getting elbowed like that is that they need to turn. They need to turn and see me. They need to see my needs, wants, and desires. They need to stop doing whatever the behavior is that's so hurtful or harmful to me. And when they do so, the conflict goes away. And of course, the other person's thinking the same thing on the other side. And so nobody turns. And then we start talking about turning first. A lot of times what happens is that you try to get in front of the person, right? So you actually try to move in a way, and this diagram doesn't really reflect this, but it would actually be Miriam on the left trying to get in front of the other person, again, so that they see me, so that they see my needs, wants, and desires, and so they change. That was sort of Miriam cleaning the gym with hopes that Mahmoud would turn and see her. And what it really requires is for us to turn first. And when I say that, it means that we see them regardless of they see us. We begin to see their needs, wants, and desires. And then we try our best to be as helpful as we can to create that invitational space. And that's how we actually invite other people to turn. And as easy as this diagram looks, in real life, it's really, really hard. And a lot of the book is, to what you alluded to, Henry, is my personal experiences with myself struggling to turn at home, to turn in workplace settings, and then my work internationally as well. A lot of it with a group called PeacePlayers that brings together Israelis and Palestinians through the game of basketball. It has been a masterclass for me in what it means to actually turn and how hard it actually is.
Everybody's gonna cry.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing story.
I cried at times. I'm not much of a crier, but yeah, it was a very painful book to write. It is deeply personal, in part because I felt like it requires that level of vulnerability to talk about how hard this is personally if you're going to ask other people to do it.
Yeah. There's this great Maya Angelou quote, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty.
Yeah, that's heading a couple of chapters where I'm talking about these two views of conflict that I think we can have. One is the what I call the smog view of conflict, which is that conflict is coming for us. There's nothing we can do about it. It's going to engulf us, and it creates a high level of fear about conflict just in general. So we run from conflict if we can. If we can't run, we put up our fist and we fight. Or maybe we're the type of person that just gives in every time that a conflict comes our way because we're in a low power position, or we actually think people will love us more if we just always give them what they want. And instead of facing conflict and doing what we call the cocoon move in the book, which is you're a caterpillar and you're moving along your leaves, you're doing your thing, and then there's this moment where the caterpillar decides I'm going to be a butterfly, and they get in this chrysalis or this cocoon. It's actually scary. It's dark, it's tight, it's confining in a lot of ways. And actually, the more research I did on this, it's actually pretty incredible. It's like the caterpillar like liquefies and dissolves. It really dies. And I've never paid this close attention to it. It was actually a student, by the way, who gave me this analogy. I never paid close attention to it before, but a butterfly is not a caterpillar with wings. I mean, you look at it, it's a completely different creature when it comes out, but it can fly. And if you view conflict from a cocoon perspective, it's not that it isn't hard or that it won't be painful or that there's going to be those uncomfortable moments, but it is that it has the ability to be transformative in positive ways. And when you have that attitude about conflict and the people that you're in conflict with, my experience is that people can collaboratively problem solve anything. I mean, really, there isn't anything that we can't solve together when you have that view. But if you're afraid of it and afraid of the people that you're in conflict with, there's a million reasons and justifications why you'll never get it done, and actually becomes self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways, right? Our conflicts get worse, and then we blame it. And by the way, you're hearing, welcome to Hawaii. This is... I thought I'd give you, I was going to go to my office, but I thought I'll give you the full experience here. And so this is the experience of living with Hawaii. Chickens starting to...
Chad, you're the first bringing in guest that I'm going to ask this question to, which is, are you keeping poultry?
No, this is not some sort of COVID-19 food storage in the backyard. There was a hurricane that hit Hawaii a number of years ago and hit a number of chicken farms, and the chickens spread throughout the island wide. And
just deposited chickens at your house?
These are just in the woods behind me. There's probably like 10, 12 chickens back there, and they also don't know when to crow. And so it's sometimes at 4 a.m, sometimes 3 a.m. If you've spent a lot of time in the country in Hawaii, not down at Waikiki, you'll know this is the number one complaint of tourists, is the chickens all hours of the day and night. So we're gonna be hearing a lot of it here soon.
And so those are all fertilized eggs that you can't eat too, right?
I don't even know where the eggs are, to be honest with you. So
wow. That's awesome. Wait, and I'm guessing quarantine in Hawaii is just better than quarantine in New Jersey?
Pretty much everything in Hawaii is better than it is everywhere else. Right. And so, the rule is when you live in Hawaii, you can't complain about ever living in Hawaii. Yeah. So, it's good.
Can you go on the beaches and everything? Like, is the outside available?
No, they stopped that. You can surf, interestingly enough, but you have to actually walk straight from beach to the water. If you're parking at the beach at all, police will come by and ticket you now. And so my kids are very, very upset about that because we have a lot of beaches. And so it actually is safe to socially distance at a lot of the beaches here, especially on the North Shore. But, it's still, we're trying our best here, like everybody is, to nip this in the bud. And it's especially really important in Hawaii because we don't have the medical resources that a lot of other states do. We can very, very quickly get overwhelmed.
And I know this is like a typical outsider stereotypical thing to say about Hawaii, but like I know the names like 2 or 3 famous people who live in Hawaii, and to think you would know them is a joke. But for the record, last time you and I talked, you brought up Jack Johnson.
Yeah, Jack Johnson lives really, really close, actually, and yeah, he's. In fact, this is my daughter's gonna freaking kill me, but his son, Jack Johnson's son, was like very, very interested in her. She's 15, and she chose the plumber's son instead of Jack Johnson. And Jack Johnson's son, which I think he was, oh man, I want to get in so much trouble for this, which I think he was really upset with. And I was really like, on one way, like, I'm really proud of you. Like that must be a tough choice to turn down Jack Johnson's son. And on the other hand, I was like slightly disappointed. I'm like, thinking about dinners at Jack Johnson's house and what have you. So
listen, we have asked our kids to become plumbers. I think it's a very solid job and super handy to the family. So if you have a plumber in the family, like nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah. And she's amazing. I actually read about her in the book. And actually, this is actually one of the stories is finding out that she's dating behind my back and when she's not supposed to be. And one of the great conflict stories in the book, which she doesn't know that is in the book, but she'll never watch this, I don't think.
She's going to kill you for the book, I'm guessing, but this will be fine. He'll be fine.
She's 15, so she wants to kill me every day. And so, or every other day. I keep having these dreams, David, where she walks in, not just her, some of my other kids too. They walk in the night, since this is all COVID-19 since then, and they're like smothering me with a pillow. And most of this is the biggest conflict that goes on in my life and my wife's life right now, which is around screen time. And, how much screen time is appropriate. And given that we're stuck here all day, they think about 14 to 18 hours a day is probably appropriate. We think seriously less, and so this is the major conflict in the Ford home every day.
So even in Hawaii, they have this conflict. That's good to know. That's comforting.
Oh, it's so addictive. Like before the beaches were done or whatever, like, okay, let's go to the beach. No, we can't. We the screens. We're in the middle of Animal Crossing.
I wanted to say one thing, Chad. You talked about seeing, that word seeing, and not just in a physical sense. It's such a big part of, in my opinion, coaching. We need to see our players. We need to see their story and their family story. When I was just talking to an NBA coach the other day about questions to ask through Zoom, these draft prospects, and we'll talk about the draft a little later. And that's one of the first things I said is don't just ask them what it was like to play college basketball. Ask what their parents did for a living. What was it like growing up? Get to know that young man and start to try to see him. It makes it easier to project when you know who they are. I also think I know very little about staying married, but somehow I've tried to do it for almost 30 years now. And seeing your partner is a very valuable thing. Really seeing their struggles, their conflict. We're not born really doing that naturally. It's a challenge to try to do that, and a good idea to do it.
Yeah, obviously the family stuff is at the end of the day going to be the most important for everybody else. We talk about all these other things in our life, but I can't tell you how often I've been in the Middle East, and the biggest challenge, you'd think it's okay, the Middle East conflict or everything else, but the biggest challenge when you cut down to it is a family issue. It's what I think causes the deepest amount of pain when it's not going right, and has the greatest potential for joy when it is going right. And one of the reasons I wrote the book and wrote it the way that I did, which was to be really accessible to a large audience. I actually had this rule of thumb that I wanted my mom, who graduated from high school but never went to college, and I wanted her to be able to read it and understand it cover to cover. And when that was ready, it was time to go. And in many ways, I wrote it for her. She's been through a lot of conflict in her life as well. And, here I'd learned all this stuff in graduate school and all the stuff in the world. And like, how do I share it in a way that's really accessible? But to your coaching point, there's, Steve Kerr endorsed the book, and R.C. Buford, and several others, and in part because I've been working with them for a long time, this nonprofit PeacePlayers.
Right.
And one of the ways we piloted a lot of this stuff, because a lot of my experience has been going over there and working in some of the difficult, most intractable conflict in the world, is that PeacePlayers brings Israelis and Palestinians together through the game of basketball. And one of the cool things about teaching these principles is you can teach it on the court. That's a language that they actually share.
Yep.
Right. But people are really surprised when they come over there. They think that all day we're going to just be talking about Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But when we teach these concepts like seeing people as a person or seeing people as an object, we actually start with thinking about it at home. So mom and dad, brothers and sisters, and then we go to friends and teachers at school, and then we go to team. And that's all before we're talking about the larger socio-political conflict that's happening. And it's really interesting in team. They may speak different languages, but when you play basketball or any sport together, you share a common language that you actually really understand. And we can talk all day and night about what the difference is on a basketball team that sees people as people versus a basketball team that sees people as objects. What a basketball team where they see their coach as a person versus a team where they see their coach as an object. A team where the coach sees the players as a person as opposed to an object, a vehicle just to help them win basketball games, or an obstacle because they're not helping me win basketball games. And by the time they really internalize this language and become really alive to not only seeing each other, but actually it produces success on the basketball court. One of the reasons I think basketball has been so important in peace building is it is such a collaborative endeavor. Unless you're Allen Iverson and you're just, going to put your head down and try to score the basketball every time on your own and play 1-on-5, you're not going to win many basketball games if you don't learn how to pass, right? If you don't learn which shots are good shots to take and which shots are bad shots to take, to learn how to play help defense and what have you. And these concepts are actually really important in life as well. And so one of the things we're really working on with our coaches, who aren't life coaches, by the way, they're basketball coaches, they're not, peace building or mediators, is how do you take those same concepts that are so important on the court and make sure they understand how they apply off the court. And so another audience I really hope embraces this book are coaches, because coaches have this incredible opportunity when they're working with these young people to not only teach the fundamentals of the game, but to actually teach them how the fundamentals of the game reflect life. And that the same things that are true in the game that help you become successful as a team can absolutely help you off the court be successful in your relationships. And we've seen it go to the point that it's literally helped Israelis and Palestinians be able to live together and work together, not only just with their teammates, but their parents and even people in their community. And so much of that has been taught through the game of basketball.
Judy, this is a totally unfair thing that probably is impossible. But yesterday, Lindsay Gibbs, who's a wonderful sports writer on Substack, tweeted a photograph of WNBA players on the bench. If there's any chance you can draw that up in the next little bit, it would be totally awesome. But I saw this picture yesterday, Chad, of like basically humans having the warmest interaction you can imagine. And it's, I think, the bench of a Team USA game. And they're cracking up at something. Someone's making a face. And I immediately thought of you, because I was like, God bless basketball for giving them this way to know each other and to be on the same team. But also, we've probably done 12 interviews about subordinate goals. I won't make you drag it out again, but like you taught me this thing a long time ago that I think about all the time. And I think that it might be oh my God, you did it. Amazing. Look at this.
Yeah.
Like,
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. So, these are people from all over the world with all different backgrounds, but with basketball as a subordinate goal, a thing bigger than themselves. Also, maybe I think women's basketball has been in a struggle to exist over their lifetimes, right, as a sport. And terrible that it's been in this struggle, but one of the benefits of it is that they're in this shit together, right? Like making it to the Olympics where this may have happened, or the World Championships, I'm not sure where it is. There's a lot of joy in that maybe isn't as readily appreciated by an NBA player who's never had to worry about the game existing for them. Anyway, this feels a little bit like a photograph that embodies the way that a sport can bring people together.
And you just see it with the most successful teams, right? I mean, one of the reasons that I've been really interested learning from our for examples, the Spurs have that culture that it's part of how they see the game and how they see their entire organization. And while talent still matters in the NBA, so much of when you watch the Spurs during their heyday, even though they had one of the greatest players of all time, like Tim Duncan on their team, was how they shared the ball, how unselfish they were as a team, how they moved the ball until they got the best shot on the court. And that wasn't just, that was a culture that was built throughout the organization, and one where the Spurs saw their players deeply as people, where the players saw each other and Popovich and the entire team that way. And we all know that there's plenty of stories in the NBA where that doesn't happen, where that team doesn't feel that way. Despite having tons of talent on the court, they don't experience the same level of success. And one of the things we talk about is this sort of self-interest versus we interest. I'm me focused or I'm we focused. And I think almost all coaches understand this concept. This is a concept that coaches have been using, right, for decades. But I think it's really impactful because when we're me focused, even in conflict, my biggest question is, what is going to happen to me, right? Everything is centered around how are other people impacting me? What is going to happen to me? And when we're we focused, our question isn't, and I think this is really important, it's not just saying the other person is the only person that matters here. Just give them what they want. If you're really a good person, you'll just give in. And that it's actually not that, it's we. It means, how do I collaboratively problem solve in a way that both gets me what I need, because that's important. And life isn't sustainable if we're always just giving away everything and we're never getting what we need. But at the same time, their needs and wants matter just as much to me. And so the concern is a we concern. And I think we should see that in basketball all the time. When there's we concern on the basketball court, when everybody is focused on winning and helping each other, something magical happens. I think the sport is actually magical to watch when that happens. And when it's me focused and you have the player over dribbling and just looking for their shot and calling on everybody to set a screen for me so I can get to the basket, and then being frustrated. We saw this on the Cavs this year in a major way. Kevin Love reacting.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty famous little clip of what it looks like the other way. It's completely dysfunctional. You can't win, and you can't do that.
But it used to be able to, right? It seems to me like over the time that we've been watching the NBA, we've transitioned from people did win championships. Like
just
Michael
playing
Jordan
ISO basketball.
What?
Just playing ISO all day.
Yeah, I mean, I think those guys that you worked with in PeacePlayers actually changed the league so that you're not going to beat the Warriors with ISO ball. You might beat the 1987 Cavs with ISO basketball, right? But now you have to beat the Warriors or the Spurs or someone who does have the ball pinging around and is defending more sophisticated way. And that's a bunch of players who are more team focused, right? It's a reality in the league now, which I think makes it. I think this is part of what retired players are so angry about, right? They're like, just hammer the ball in there. It's like, no, that won't do it anymore. They're playing better than that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, the year before the Raptors won the World Championship, when they had Dwayne Casey, they made a huge jump from bottom 10 in the league in passes per game to top whatever. That was a part of the process. Then they changed coaches, but they didn't lose that. That was still a big factor. They had just added Kawhi Leonard, who by himself can score, but he also had a career high. I think he almost doubled his assists per game average to over 5 last year because he started. In fact, Pop even talked about he became a much better passer as he got older. You gotta help the helper on both sides of the court. Help the helper.
And an interesting thing, just to go back to the draft for a minute. 15 years ago, when I was covering the draft and falling in love with international players, part of the appeal, for right and for wrong, was how they were taught the game and how they played the game. You'd go to Serbia and you'd watch how these coaches would play the game. And it didn't matter whether you were 7 foot or 6 foot. They taught you how to play every position on the court. And you'd go into practices and their center 7-footer would be bringing the basketball up the court deliberately because the coach wanted the players to understand how all the players interacted and what their roles were. And the skill development that was there for players and the unselfishness of moving the basketball and playing team basketball was drilled into their their heads at such a young age. And I think that was the part of the appeal of these international players, was their versatility, their ability to play multiple positions on the floor, and their basketball IQ and understanding around what it meant to be those different positions throughout the floor. Now, it turned out that I fell in love with some players that turned out to not actually be really good basketball players, at least at the NBA level with that. But that was the appeal early on of those players. And I do think that the NBA, those players that did make the league, helped transform the league. And that has been a big part of this shift and movement, is that basketball in the NBA today looks more like the European basketball of 15, 20 years ago than it did at the time.
This is a total David Thorpe talk right here. Like, you, like, I'm going to paraphrase a lot of things that you say better, but like, Darko might have been amazing if he went to a different team, right?
That's literally what I was just going to say. I had your back, Chad. And I can't say that I did have your back on Darko when it happened, because I didn't know. I wasn't following the league that closely. But I can tell you that, and I mean this sincerely, 100% of players that I've personally coached and like being a second father to, who played with Darko, all of them have said, oh, we totally understand why he went number 2. Outrageously talented and amazing guy. But think of playing basketball on the NBA level, kind of like learning languages. When you're really young, you can learn 5, 6 languages. At some point, you age out of that. It becomes much, much harder to learn even a second language. So Darko, in his most opportune time to learn the language of the NBA, sat the bench for the best team in the league.
And people made fun of me.
That would have changed everything if he had gone to a different team that was just bad, and let him play and figure it out. Literally play and figure it out.
Yeah, and look, that part wasn't his fault. The Pistons had gotten the number 2 pick in a trade. They were an elite team already, and Larry Brown wasn't going to play a rookie out of Serbia. But I also say this goes back to, again, seeing people as well, because here's Darko. He comes over from Serbia, from a fairly poor family at 18. Now he's living in Detroit. Yeah. The culture is different. He barely speaks the language. He doesn't have friends or family over here. He's not playing. He's the butt of jokes right from the beginning, right? Because Carmelo Anthony's having an incredible season, and Chris Bosh looks great, and obviously LeBron James is LeBron James, and Dwayne Wade, and he's super hyped. And the level of depression, just as a human being, that he started to sink into, the alcohol, all of these other things, and things that I think NBA teams are more alive to today than maybe the Pistons were in 2003, about what happens when you take a young player, you bring them into a new environment. How do you life coach them, through whatever is happening there? There's just a lot less of that in the NBA at that time. And right. I think it was the combination of not being able to play, but also the psychological impact that had on Darko in a certain way, where he just gave up. And he felt like coaches had lied to him, and he gave up.
It happened at Jean Lien. He didn't even know the language. He faked it. I got to know him very well. He actually came to my house during the lockout for Hanukkah dinner, my parents' house. His name is Jean Lien, not E. That's his last name. They just list last name first, and he didn't speak the language. And it also happened to Kwame Brown, which has been covered in some articles, where he just was left to rot. I saw him as a senior in high school. Can't miss first pick in the draft, unless you just ignore the fact that he didn't know even how to dry clean his suits.
Right.
There's a famous story where he called his agent, "Hey, I have no suits for our road trip." They're like, "We bought you 10 suits." He's like, "I know, I don't have any left."
They're all just loaded up on his floor. Yeah.
Exactly. He had no idea. He didn't know how to get food in DC, because he was a Southern boy from Georgia and just wasn't used to it. And just what you said, Chad, the Wizards, or whoever it was, I don't know if it was Bullets or Wizards then, they didn't even know how to develop him as a man, as a young man. It was just basketball only. So it's all that same idea. We lose really good talent because of that.
And then you look at Giannis Antetokounmpo. Fast forward to 2013.
Yeah.
And the Bucks took a very, very different approach with Giannis, and they knew what that transition was going to be like. They worked on getting his family over there. David Morway, who was the assistant general manager at the time, had him over playing video games with his sons. on downtime all the time, because he was 18 years old and that's what he really wanted to be doing, is playing video games and be playing video games with other kids that were his age. Right? That's kind of what he wanted to be doing, and just a completely different approach.
Wait, Chad, your kids want me to stop you on this point. Your kids want me to stop you. Like, video games are good for MVP Giannis, but not for your kids.
You know, when my kids go out and are earning millions of dollars a day playing on the basketball court, they can play many video games as they want.
So Chad, are you saying, and I mean this sincerely, that Milwaukee they weren't losing it that he was doing that? Because I remember when Tracy McGrady first went to Toronto and he just wanted to chill. It was a kid. I think his coach Darryl Walker said he's a bust, like he'll never make it.
Yeah.
So if they embrace that, that's brilliant strategy for them.
Yeah, they did. And look, let's also just point out, Giannis is an incredible human being as well, with an incredible work ethic, with a deep desire to be better. But I do absolutely think that it helped that the Bucks, who actually drafted him and thought they were going to send him to the D League. And, you know, that one of the tweets I get made fun of the most was writing later on draft night, he's a very expensive D League pick at 15. And he's, you know, a couple of years away from playing in the NBA. That's what the Bucks literally told me that night on the phone. The people that drafted him that told me that. I mean, I made the line about the expensive D League player, but that was the plan for him. And I actually think it's a bit of just great circumstance that due to some injuries and some free agent losses, the Bucks ended up not being nearly as competitive as they thought they were going to be that year. And then they felt it was okay to just roll him out on the court and just give him the minutes the same way Dallas ended up with Dirk, and let him struggle and drown a little bit on the court, but give him playing time, which I think for young players, David, I mean, I'm sure you would concur. Yeah. It's not just skills development. You can skills develop all day. It's the actual playing that is what really develops them as players.
David Epstein talks about this. We had him. He's been a guest on twice. You got to let him just go play. You can't be so micromanaging, and you got to see them for who they are and let them. I call it royal jelly, as you guys know. You got to love them up and let them make their mistakes, and this is how you get to be so dominant. I was curious, Chad, to ask you, knowing what you do and knowing you as long as I have, I got my job at ESPN because of you, plain and simple, in 2007. Your conflict resolution skills and your work as a journalist too, that combination, do you think has helped you? You built your career with the draft, not evaluating the talent as much as getting the talent evaluators to trust you and talk to you. And then you could tell us all the stories of the draft that you did so well and still do. Do you think that helped you do that, just knowing how to identify with these people and connect with them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of it, just to be honest, was as a non-pro basketball player and non-NBA coach, I maybe had the humility that these professional scouts and former professional players were better evaluating talent than I was. And so, this wisdom of crowds and this idea that talking to a lot of really smart people who do this professionally for a living would produce a better big board than me on my own, just diving into synergy and giving my opinion. And second, having the reporter mentality, which was that I'm there to actually help you understand what NBA teams are thinking about these players, as opposed to just what Chad is thinking about players. And I'm not knocking the other way. I mean, Mel Kiper has made an incredible career by telling you what Mel Kiper thinks about each of these draft prospects. And that's one way to approach it. It just wasn't my way. Not that I wasn't evaluating talent and watching synergy and had my own opinions about it, but I just thought it was better. And so I actually think, to your point, why I developed so many relationships is information is the currency in the NBA.
Yeah,
it's a really important one. And when the other scouts and general managers know that I'm talking to the other scouts and general managers, it was much about getting information as it was giving information, and knowing that I was not going to talk to you if you were lying to me all the time. Now, I still got lied to. It happened. Some people were forever shunned from me because of that, and some people.
Ooh, I'd love to know who's on that list.
There's a few people on that that have flat out lied to me, and but I think it had to do with that. I think the conflict part, interestingly enough, was in some ways, look at it may have hindered my career in a certain extent because I was also busy doing other things and maybe didn't
Right.
dive into this as much as becoming obsessed with it. But on the other side, I think it helped me see the humanity of the players, the agents, the front offices that tell really human stories. And David, because I did this with several of the people that you were training, I would travel out to these places and spend a day or two with prospects, really trying to just get to know them as people and not just evaluating them shooting around, because I thought that was really important to the process. And one of the things, for better or for worse, is I pulled for all of these guys. I really wanted every player that I saw to be really successful in the league, which meant a lot of conversations at night. Agents would call me up, "Hey, can you talk to this player? I'm trying to get them to do this or that. Can you talk to them about that?" And I always did that. And maybe it took away some objectivity, but to me, what a beautiful dream that these players had, how transformative it was going to be for their lives and their families' lives. And if I could help a little bit, I always wanted to help. And so I've always had that mentality, and not every scout has it. A lot of scouts look at things and try to see, well, this is what he can't do. It's so easy to look at a player and see their flaws and then point out that those flaws are going to lead them to fail in the NBA. And there's a lot of very professional scouts that have made big careers for themselves by just always pointing out what a guy can't do. And to me, it was always the opposite. I always wanted to find out, what could you do? Where is that potential? And that to me is the thing that is a thread that runs through the conflict stuff as well. I'm not actually that interested in how badly you're behaving right now in conflict. People do that. And we're our worst selves when we're in conflict. What I'm looking at is there's something inside of you that if we could access it, if we could tap into that, that'll allow you to get out of this conflict and change. And I think that's the gift that some scouts have in the draft, is to be able to see that. I think that's the gift some coaches have, and to be able to see potential and know how to put a player in the right position. And I think it's a gift that all of us should try to be cultivating just in our lives, in our personal lives, of seeing other people and not just letting them be the culmination of their mistakes or their bad attributes or the stuff that annoy us. But how do we dig deeper and tap into that incredible part of them, which I believe exists in every human being, and how do we help surface that and let that shine?
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Chad, you live that. We're here at True Hoop because Henry has such a demand for just the truth. It really, and the opposite of that, lies make him hairless. It drives him crazy. And I love that about Henry. But Chad, you told me a great story. We had dinner one night on one of your trips down to see my players, and we had been friends for years at this point. I was at ESPN, and you just out of nowhere said, "David, do you remember you used to always call me?" And I said, "Yeah." And you said, "I never took your calls." And I said, "Right." I had no NBA players at the time. I was just kind of starting it. And he said, did you ever wonder why I started taking your phone calls and how we got to be such good friends?" And I said, "No, I never even thought about it really." And you said, "I write everything, every voice message you left me, I wrote down what you said." And he's like, and you said, "Just one day I decided to go back and look at some records, and I found this David Thorpe. And it turned out like you weren't lying to me. The stuff you were saying was accurate. You
I was right.
An opinion." And I started taking your phone calls. And so I was blown away with the humility aspect of it. I knew I wasn't lying, but most guys would never admit that. They would just continue to ignore me forever. And that's not who you are. And I think that's a big process, big part of the process of not just your success, but any of our success. Just be honest with people, be humble about it. We can be confident, but we can also be humble too, and recognize that what we first thought of someone, because I do come off as probably being very loud and outspoken, doesn't mean we're right. We should give them another chance.
Yeah, you're also an incredible person, David, and I just like being around incredible people. I mean, the other thing that I saw with you, and unfortunately this isn't the case universally in this business, is they actually cared about the players that you're working with. You weren't just trying to make money off them. And I hate to say it, but there are some people in this business that is what they're trying to do. That is 100% their motivation. They're using the players as a way to get themselves attention, fame, money. what have you. And that was never you. And I could sense that, and that became a big part of it. And, you know, when we all got to ESPN together, one of the reasons I was advocating for you and Henry, and, you know, there was a beautiful moment. I actually admit, this is the one thing people ask me what I miss about ESPN. There was a time when our team with Mark Stein and Jay Adonde and you know, Brian Windhurst, and you go through the entire team that was there at the time, we were working as a team, which was really unique in my opinion in the sport. We would give tips to each other. We didn't care who broke the story. ESPN wanted to break the story. We helped support each other in the articles that we were writing. All of us had different experiential levels and sources about things. There was so much of a collaboration with Chris Ramsey and Royce, and then later Henry taking over as editor as well, that was happening there. I just think that was a beautiful time. I think it made ESPN's NBA coverage must-read coverage, but the truth was it was the sum of all those parts, not an individual part, that really made it hum, and I miss that.
We agree.
These things run on trust, right? Like, we think it runs on like skill and hard work, but without the trust part, you can't. You know, like, we're saying the same thing about basketball or media or everything, right? If you're going to give the ball up, you got to kind of love that person who's going to catch it, right? And that's something you have to earn over time. And you just told the story of David earning that from you. And, you know, we've all had these experiences with each other where we trusted each other. And I feel like all of the stuff that I care about is a result of that kind of teamwork, which is a thrill. It's a thrill to be part of that, right? Where you're just like,
fun.
You pass the ball and you're like, ooh, I know he's going to do something great with this, right? Like, that's the best.
Yeah, it's we, not me. It's we, just like Chad was saying before. It's a we, not me situation. It's not a transactional relationship. It's a real valuable relationship.
And all those people behind the scenes, because we were often out in front of the scenes.
Yeah.
That made all of that stuff hum to me. I you know, to this day, people like Chris Ramsey and Royce Webb are heroes to me, because no one knows who they are. Yet they're so critical in so many of the things that really made things special.
They made that happen, for sure. Chad, is there any chance that Jack Johnson's son has deposited a rooster outside your house? Is that a thing?
I ignore it. I don't even hear it anymore.
All right. So one of the sort of running unintentional gags of this show is that I forget to tell everyone how to ask a question. We're now basically past the time the show is supposed to end.
Let's
Devin
go longer.
Has hopefully reminded everybody, even though I haven't. But if you'd like to ask a question, it's lively that it's happening. Click the little chat button. You can type it in there. If you'd like to join us on video, use the word video. There are some questions rating that I would like to get
13 of them. Yes.
Yeah, there's a million. There's a million. Number one, Devin says to subscribe to Chad's podcast. It's awesome. That's good advice. I think you should do that.
Thank you.
Question for Chad, also from Devin. Are your students or anyone else outside your family aware that you have an MBA background?
Actually, I try to actually keep that a secret. I live in a really small community here, and a lot of the community knows. In fact, the joke was I can't go to the grocery store. We live in a really, really small town, and it got so ridiculous because also everybody knows where I live. I've actually moved since then, and this isn't really the reason, but maybe it was subliminally part of it. Literally get people knocking on my door asking, what's going on with the Lakers? You know, there's a huge Laker thing here. And I'm not joking that people would knock on my door, and so I'd open it up and it's just like, I just want to talk to you about the Lakers for a bit.
Because you wouldn't take the phone calls.
Yeah. It's just everyday community people. And occasionally you get somebody taking my class who's like, oh my gosh, I'm taking a class. I don't want to talk about the NBA every day. It's going to be super disappointed when I don't even acknowledge it or mention it. And then a lot of my students that are super shocked that sometimes have been in my class for a couple of years that were home over the summer break and their dads had ESPN on or something like that. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, what?
That's funny.
And so, you know, that was really funny, but I've kept those worlds, you know, fairly separate here. But then combine them with PeacePlayers in many ways was where those worlds really combined, and using basketball and I will say that in the conflict world, it was interesting at times that I could get indoors or in spaces in part because of the ESPN stuff. that maybe it would have been hard for me to get into because of it. And so there were some benefits there as well.
I remember you and I were collaborating on some very high intensity breaking news kind of stuff years ago. Maybe LeBron free agency 2010. I'm not sure I remember what it was, but you were at the grocery store talking to me on the earbuds or whatever. And I remember like hearing the background. Someone interrupts you and asks you something, and then you're
Probably
like,
where LeBron was going, which I got
think it
asked like
was.
50 times a day.
Right. And then I remember you saying like, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. Okay, Randy has a question. Oh, sorry, you want to talk more?
I was just going to say, the other thing is there were some of my closer friends who knew very well and you know, always wanted to come over to the house and watch games with me or whatever. And when my phone would ring, I mean, they would just freeze into place, like during free agency, like, wait, am I going to get this before anybody else? Like you just see them waiting. Like, what are you talking about? Really funny.
Like, settle down, Jack Johnson. Okay. Randy has a great question here. Have any or many of the Peace Players gone into politics and used the lessons they learned in the program?
Not politics yet, because of how recent this program really is, right? I mean, we're talking about that first wave of really great kids being in their mid-20s right now. I can say many of them are coaches for our team. They're running basketball programs now. Some have moved into the Peace Players front office, if you will. One of our Palestinian young women became the student body president at her college in the West Bank, and was a voice for moderation in ways that you can imagine. Sometimes at college things get a little radical. We're not quite there yet, but I think that give us another decade on that. And that's, people, oh my gosh, decade, and we've been working on this for 15 years. And that's just, that's the sort of patience that is involved in like deep, sustainable community and social change. It takes that level of commitment. And one of the reasons that I think it fails so often is that people are impatient and don't have that patience. I've told my family, Dad, when are you going to quit going to the Middle East? And the answer is never, because I'm going to be an old man and I still think be chipping away at this. And that's not me being pessimistic. That's just me being realistic about when you think about these sorts of conflicts. And I use this oatmeal analogy in my classes a lot, that if you've ever had a bowl of oatmeal and when you're done with it, you immediately take it to the sink and rinse it out. Oatmeal's like slime. It just like literally just like slips out of the bowl and it's gone. If you leave that oatmeal in your bowl all day, it's like glue. It starts to stick to the side of that, and then you may have to soak it or scrub it. Now imagine that you've left it in the bowl for like 40, 50, 60 years, right? And then the idea is you want to just get rid of the bowl, but it sometimes takes that amount of time to undo the conflict that we're in. And a big part of my book is that when you turn, you have to be patient about the other person turning. They're not going to necessarily turn right away because of all the damage that may have been done in a conflict. And part of turning is, Miriam's experience in some ways was unique in that Mahmoud turned pretty quickly back towards her, that in many, many cases, we have to be really, really patient about that turning.
Yeah, that's a funny story, because he was secretly desperate to heal something there, right? He was super motivated. He wasn't just like, he had a reason to engage too, right?
Yeah, exactly. He did, and tapping into that and understanding what that pain point is for people could be really helpful. And that to me is always the key. Was it how do you help yourself see someone as a person? To me, it's being alive to their pain.
Yeah.
And one of the things that just blows me away, and doesn't matter whether I'm working with NBA draft prospects or working with front offices or coaches, or I'm out working with companies or families, or in the Middle East, there's so much pain in there. I think we miss on a day-to-day level the amount of weight, pain that people are carrying. We put on a good face. I know, Henry, you've gone through some really painful stuff recently as well, and you're here smiling and you're putting on a good face. But then, when the lights go off and the cameras go off, there's pain and things that we carry with us.
This is effort number 13 to make me cry during the show, Chad. You're not going to get me. I'm not going to cry on camera today. Thank you very much. You're really good, though. You're good at this. Well done.
But yeah, Henry, I mean, being vulnerable, I mean, one, it's hard to be vulnerable, and especially as men. and we got a lot of men on the show. We are taught to have a stoic face and to suck it up. And it was really interesting. One of my former students actually texted me last night, and we had a bit of a disagreement about something that she had wrote, and we'd hammered it out. We had a good talk, on the phone, and she said something, that was really helpful to me, that, men haven't in the past been very emotionally available to me. And it was really helpful, to hear that. And then she started talking about her dad. And, my reaction to it is, yeah, your dad was taught a lot like I was taught, that, you never want your kids in some ways to see your pain, right? Your job's to be the rock. Your job is to deal with their problems and not ever have to worry about your problems. But actually, it's interesting the way that it creates disconnection in ways. I've learned my kids actually want to know my problems and what I'm struggling with and challenge. I hate to tell them, but they want to know. And I think we have that same thing. And so I think it's okay, first of all, to be in pain. But I think it's also incumbent on us to acknowledge when people are acting out or they're struggling or whatever, to ask yourself that first question. What are they wrestling with right now? What's hard in their life right now? And is there any way that I'm making it harder, or is there anything that I could do to lighten that load? I actually end the book with a story about my father and about him passing away and a conflict.
15, by the way, just for the record.
Book what?
15 distinct attempts to make me cry.
And a really painful experience of having to reconcile with him, before he passed away. And, recognizing our pain, and we'd just be so much better if we just were alive to that every day, alive to our family's pain, alive to our coworkers' pain, alive to the kids that we coach, or our coaches' pain, at times. I was with this group of high performance athletes at the U.S. Olympic training facility several years ago. These were not basketball players. In fact, all their sports were sort of individual-esque sort of sports. And it's really interesting because you can win like a team gold medal, but actually if you ask most of these athletes what they really want, it's the individual gold medal. Like, that's between the two, they're gonna choose the individual gold medal. Most of them, not all of them, but many of them. And we were doing a workshop around this, and they were really fighting me on this. And it was really interesting when they opened it up. One of the things that one of them found out was that their coach had gone through a divorce like 2 years ago. They didn't even know. And they're like, oh, well, that may explain a lot of different things that was going on with my coach. I mean, here's somebody who trained with their coach every single day, but they only saw their coach as giving them the tools that they needed to be successful, and never once actually thought about the human being that was their coach. I mean, they were literally crying in the room like, I didn't know. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I wasn't alive to you. And, and we struggle to allow people to be alive to us. That's a problem. And we struggle to be alive to other people. And so if you want to know, really how dangerous love starts, it's actually being alive to that. And that's scary. It's scary to be vulnerable, and it's scary sometimes to be open to other people's vulnerability.
Amen. Gerard is a wonderful contributor who needs to reclaim his place as our favorite commentator, because Devin's having a killer day, Gerard. Devin also told us, by the way, Darko is a farmer now. I haven't.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, how about that?
It was a boxer for a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Get some of that aggression out.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Gerard's here on video. How you doing, sir?
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey, Gerard.
Hey, Chad. I actually watched your TED Talk. It was really good. And you're no problem. Your philosophies are really philosophies for life, right? I mean, it's just versus vis-a-vis basketball. But talking about the NBA, how much of this is about really reverse engineering these players, right? At least a percentage of them, because so many of them come from these traumatic situations in their life. And now you're telling me I've got to trust people and do all these things that, why would I want to do that? The only person I've been able to rely on in my whole life is me. That's why I'm here. And now you want to tell me to open up and do, no, when I open up, bad things happen, right? Like, and how that's such a challenge, I would imagine, to do that. And then when you throw in the fact of fame and celebrity and money on top of that, which again, that's what they get. That's what the marketplace demands. So I don't begrudge them for that. It probably makes it harder to reach them on that level, right?
Well, yeah, because actually, interesting, we never talk about this, but fame is dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to be famous, But I was like a D-list celebrity for a little while when I was at ESPN. Like, there's a few people that recognized me, when I go to dinner or something like that. And I actually thought, oh, that'd be fun. I hated it. Like anytime I go out with my family to eat, like people just interrupt you in the middle of your meal with your family and say, hey, tell me about the Lakers, or, just sit down and your job is to be polite to them, but at times it became difficult to be a human being. And if you get to an A-list celebrity, like a professional basketball player or whatever, and you can just imagine that their entire time, people don't have boundaries. People think that because you're famous, you owe them something, their time, whatever. And you're going to get blasted on social media if you do anything other than give them all the time in the day. And so that's dehumanizing. But I think you also point out this point, Gerard, that for many of these young people that are playing the game, they have been dehumanized their whole life, in part because of maybe their gift. And everybody's seen how they could utilize that gift in a way that helps them and gets famous. We're certainly talking about for many people of color that our entire society has sent a message of dehumanization to them and to their family and whatever that sinks in really difficult ways. How am I going to see other people as people when my whole life people see me as an object? In fact, my whole society sees me as an object. How am I going to open up and be vulnerable? Vulnerable gets you killed. And that's not dangerous love, that's stupid love, right? To a certain extent. Yep. And that's been my experience working with a lot of these young people, is that dehumanization is happening at so many levels. Also, poverty dehumanizes. And for many of the young people, the sport was a way out of that poverty, but yet they were living in a dehumanizing situation as well. And so you have all those factors, and you can imagine why sometimes players act out the way that they do. And really it becomes incumbent on coaches again to be patient through all of that and not demand that trust or respect, but to earn it. And that's going to take a long, that's that oatmeal rule again. It's going to take a long runway to be able to earn it. And what we expect out of these 18 and 19-year-old young people is mind-boggling to me. I didn't suffer from, my family was fairly poor, but other than that, I didn't suffer from any of the other dehumanizing effects that we just talked about in life. And I was a punk when I was 18 and 19, all of the time. I was so much about me. And if I had the spotlight on me the way that these young people do every day. And so this one thing I actually hate about the draft is the way that sometimes, front office and scout judge the character of players when I think they have no business judging it yet. And instead of thinking about, if we saw this person as a person and really were committed to their life success, what could they become? They immediately look and said, well, they did this or that, or this is what their high school coach said, or whatever sort of about them, and they're gone. And by the way, many times the bad mouthing that they got from their coach was because they didn't bring the coach along with them into their professional circle, at some point, and the coach wasn't benefiting from it the way that they thought.
Exactly right.
And so I actually think it's, in social media especially, the way that we refer to these young people, and how we talk about them. I'm going to be the last person to judge them when they're not seeing everybody else as a person. Given, and we, a lot of our Peace Player work in the last year has been working in cities like Detroit, Baltimore, Brooklyn, Chicago, LA. And people ask, well, what's the divide? The divide, there isn't Israeli Palestinians there. Well, certainly gang is sometimes the divide, or law enforcement's the divide. I actually think all of our coaches and Peace Players would tell you, like, our biggest work right now is helping those young people see themselves as people.
Yeah.
That's the biggest divide right now for them. And I think Peace Players can do a great job of that as well. But that's the reality in the ground in so many of our cities in the United States, is our young people don't see themselves as people. And that's the message that's been given to them their whole life. And how do we work at reversing that?
That's great.
Chad, you were a big force in this one particular example of humanizing a player. When Marcus Smart was coming into the NBA, there was this controversy because he tumbled into the stands and the ball was there, and then something happened. It's never really been told, but we kind of know what happened. Um, he ended up sort of having a moment of looking like he wanted to go after one of the fans in the stands. And
There's only one reason why you do that if you're a player like Marcus Smart.
I think I know what happened.
You know what it was.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So immediately the whole system condemns Marcus Smart. Like the commentators are like, oh, if you're Marcus Smart, you got to know you can't do that. The referees, he gets a tech. Like everybody knows Marcus Smart screwed up. That's the whole story. And this is actually the primary lens through which we see him as an NBA prospect when we get to the character thing. It's like, oh, he's the guy who had this angry moment, right? You could see it on TV. But I talked to you at that time and you were like, no. That's exactly not what we know about him. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, well, look, there's if people are wondering what white privilege looks like, there it is, right? White people can say whatever they want to people, right? And people will shake their heads or whatever. But when someone of color responds angrily, we're going to condemn them and their character for the rest of their life. I mean, that's white privilege right there. And of course, that's the narrative that comes up. Like, okay, you can't react that way. When the message should be, you can't talk that way, right? Of course, people are going to react that way because they're human beings.
Right.
When they're spoken to and talk that way, our focus should be on that you can't talk that way. And too often, this happens in our arenas in college basketball and NBA all the time. Players are spoken to that way, but all of the focus is on, unfortunately, how the player reacts to that.
So, and to bring it up to today, like he ended up, David Epstein's been very involved in this. One of the potential therapies for coronavirus is convalescent serum, right? So you're going to donate some plasma. You're going to donate some blood if you've recovered. And then, so we've talked about that a lot in the show. I ended up on the phone with some people. Marcus Smart ended up becoming the first player to say he would donate he's tested positive and recovered.
He's got like super plasma, Marcus Smart.
That's the one you want. Marcus Smart
for the whole country.
So we all said that.
Like by this crude measure of this pandemic time, the best player in the NBA. But that's what you said to me then. Like at the time of Marcus Smart's controversy, you said to me then that the people from Team USA, I hope I'm not telling a secret here, the Team USA told you that basically he wasn't a questionable character. He was like the best character.
He was one of the best people that they've ever worked with. Selfless, works hard. People just completely were wrong about him. And we're wrong all the time about players, even players that make mistakes. One of the great surprises based off of the media narrative was getting to know Allen Iverson a little bit as a person. Now, Allen Iverson has a lot of challenges and has made a lot of mistakes in his life, but there's also heart of gold inside there as well with players like that. And that part doesn't get talked about in the same way. And so, learning how to talk about people and the assumptive worlds that we live in that are much more reflective on us and our prejudices and our views than they ever are about the people that we're talking about. And I will tell you that the one thing I haven't enjoyed in this whole process again is going on Twitter, back on Twitter again. I told my wife, watch, I'm going to post something about this and watch the hate that's just going to blow up. And we haven't had to deal with that for a couple of years because that's not how anybody would ever talk to your face, but that's certainly the way that people sort of talk in social media. And I've gotten a pretty thick skin at ESPN over time about it. I used to do a weekly chat at ESPN and people could type in every question. And this is not a joke, not an exaggeration. For about 2 years, there was a guy that came into the chat room every week, and he would start by talking about or linking to some disaster that happened. An airplane had crashed, there was a flood, there was a tsunami or whatever. And then his line was always, and I looked through the list of the people that were dead, and unfortunately you weren't there. Wow. And so you're here for a week. And I'm like, who's motivated by whatever I have to say about the NBA draft? Jeez. That they literally show up at my chat session every week to tell me that they wish that I was dead. Like it's, and I know that person probably has a family, is probably a loving son or what have you. We have a problem, and to Gerard's point about my podcast, which was my TED Talk, which was around polarization. We are struggling in America and in some ways we always have, but I feel like it's getting worse. And I think social media may have amplified much of that. We are struggling more than ever to see the humanity of people that we disagree with. We're polarizing in ways that are truly, truly dangerous, and then pointing the finger at the other person and saying, and it's your fault that we're polarizing. And I know people hate this sort of both sidism, and you know that becomes a thing too. Like don't blame both sides when one side is clearly a bigger problem than the other side. But the problem with conflict, and I write about this in the book, there's several chapters on what I call collusion. The problem with conflict is to really have a deep collusion, right, where you have a conflict escalation spiral. It takes two people, or it always takes two. It takes you can't have it with just one person. And so whenever we bite, right, even if we're provoked, it does spiral that collusion. And it's human that we bite. And that was my point with Marcus Smart. That's the most human thing in the world to do, is to bite back. But it also, you see what it does afterwards, and how it gives justification back to the people that in a way that gives them justification for continuing to mistreat people. And the brilliance of Martin Luther King, and there were so many things that were brilliant about him, was him teaching nonviolent resistance to his followers as a way of meeting violence with nonviolence, took away the justification for violence in a way that made it very, very difficult for the people that were committing violence to keep committing that violence, and very, very difficult for the people that were dehumanizing to continue to dehumanize when their anger was met with love, or when their fire was met with water. And it's really fascinating to me, because I do conflict mediation all the time, how often people think that meeting fire with fire is what's going to put out the fire. Right. It's like a basic thing of nature that more fire does not put out the fire, but that's how we handle it all of the time.
Right.
Yeah, that's human nature. So Chad, thank you so much. Honestly, we've taken you way ton of your time.
We got to see the sun come up in Hawaii.
It's dawn in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's dawn.
That feels hopeful. I'm also thankful that just like these are the trickiest issues on the planet, and I'm thankful that someone with as big a heart and brain as yours is working on them. So I feel calmer knowing that you're out there caring about this. So thank you for that too.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And this has always been the case with you, Henry, and you, David, as well. And why I was so excited to come on your show and collaborate, and really thank you for taking a look at the book as well. I know for a lot of people that have followed me on Twitter their whole life, they're like, what in the world is Chad Ford doing writing a conflict book? And people are super confused right now, and don't think it applies to them, but I promise you it really does. And there isn't really anybody that's followed me in the NBA draft that couldn't take this book and make a relationship better in their life. And that is going to be way more valuable to you than my thoughts on LaMelo Ball.
I think we probably could fill 40 podcasts right now today with all the things that we should talk about. So maybe we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
Anytime. Love talking to you guys.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Judy. Thank you.